Hello, welcome to Beyond the Board. We're here at Main Stage Chicago. I'm Emily Blodgett. I'm going to be the host this evening. I'm head of production here at Mainstream Chicago. Tonight we have a real fun set of presentations for you. So, quick note for housekeeping, we have an in-room audience as well as a virtual audience, so kind of fun, and are asking that everyone make sure their cell phone ringers are turned off. I guess if you're home, you can keep them on, but here, if you could turn those off, that would be great. So, some context for this evening, or how it kind of came to be. We reached out to a number of members of the Chicago gaming community, everyone from creators to writers, programmers, educators, and have a great selection of presenters tonight. So they're going to pitch their best short, energetic, Pecha-Kucha inspired presentation. Tonight we have 4 different presentations, and we're going to start with Zach Berenstein presenting Great Games Make You an Artist. So please join me in giving Zach a round of applause.
To forget that tabletop role-playing games are a new medium. Just as we had stage plays for millennia before we had the first film, we've been playing board games for generations until we started role-playing, until we started thinking about the thoughts and feelings of our game pieces, asking what motivates the bishop and knight. And that's where things got interesting. Hi folks, I'm Zach Berenstein, and I'm the co-founder of Tabletail Games, an artist collective of game masters. Have a little slide. But I'm also a theater designer and musician, so much of my life has been dedicated to creating ensemble art. I love tabletop role-playing games because at their best, they're able to create meaningful aesthetic experiences rivaling any stage play, concert, or film. And that's because they're improvised works of ensemble storytelling by, for, and about me and my friends. So that's why we're looking to have those artistic experiences. We're able to create those sessions that we lie awake thinking about that incredible storytelling. How do we have sessions that are more like that? Well, we have to ask everyone at the table to be an artist, to participate in an act of creation, and to create an aesthetic game. Now, there are plenty of ways to play these types of games where you can slay dragons, roll dice, and level up, where art and beauty need not be involved. And that's totally fine. But for those of us who want a little bit more from our RPGs, there's ways to get there. So to find out what that looks like, it helps to have a clear target. Playing an aesthetic game, looking for that beauty, has 3 main components, I believe. The first is that it has to evoke emotion. There has to be genuine, meaningful content that's worthy of our emotional investment. Second, it has to require meaningful participation from everyone at the table. It can't run itself. There has to be genuine uncertainty about what happens next that the players have to decide. And third, it has to encourage self-expression. It has to make the space for everyone there to say something meaningful about themselves or about the world. Now, these are lofty goals for an RPG, to be sure. But you know where else these things are true? The jazz bandstand, improvised theater, writers' rooms, to name a few examples. So we can use these paradigms from other mediums to help guide us as we reframe our gaming experiences into aesthetic ones. So let's look at some of these tools we can use as game designers, game masters, and players to help our games make art. First is guiding structures. In literature, in theater, in music, structures are so important. They give us a shared purpose and set of values as we create with our peers. A hero's journey is a classic structure, as is a 3-act play, but so is a song or an improv game. When we're structuring our games, we're able to express the values of our game. What's important? What's easy? What's hard? What are the players incentivized to do? And will it result in something beautiful? At a finer level, the rules of our game help guide our storytelling. They are able to help us facilitate solving uncertainty and conflict between collaborators. Many systems will do this by tying it to randomness, like dice rolls or different types of checks. But the rule should always remain a supporting canvas to help facilitate our storytelling rather than a cage that holds us in. For example, if you hand me a piece of music in D minor in 4/4, that tells me what notes and rhythms are important, but it doesn't tell me what I can't play. It's just a set of values meant to focus our creativity. Third is a clear language. Films have a visual language, dance has a physical language, and every game has its own set mechanical language. Language is critical for fluency, which enables the creative exchange of ideas. So great systems let you play them like an instrument. Once you practice for a while, you don't have to think, okay, I put one hand here and I put the other hand here. Instead, you just think, ba-doo-ba-doo-ba-bwe-dum-de, and away you go, right? Which is why games with clear, precise, and limited vocabulary leave more room for self-expression. It lets you be less wargame and more Warhol. Fourth is encouraging improvisation. Great systems and ensembles will do this in a couple different ways. The first is by leaving room for uncertainty. Let things be resolved in the moment. Cordon off a section for that sax solo. And the second is by leaving the space for collaborators to be genuinely present. In improv comedy, for example, the last thing you want to do is try and be funny. Instead, you clear your mind, rely on your training, and just listen and react so the funny can find you. And great game sessions will allow that space for genuine self-discovery, where you can even surprise yourself. We can also use the tools for structured collaboration from other mediums. So say you're gathering a small group of individuals set out to create something new with a shared purpose and set of values, but each with their own individual supernatural abilities. Well, that could be your D&D party, but also, maybe that's jazz. So it's okay for everyone at your table to have different roles, and it's okay for those roles to change as the song goes on, because great collaborators and players know that it's not about any one person, it's about the resulting work. And lastly, and this is one of the most gratifying parts for me in playing the game, is creating the space for folks to find their voice. Now, you don't have to be a professional artist to create something beautiful at the table, but seasoned improvisers gain the underrated skill of facilitation. They're able to really listen to people and make space for them in a way that most folks can't. So it's always incredible to see one of the actor game masters at Tabletail Games sit down with a player with limited expectations about one of these games and help them discover new means of storytelling and self-expression. Eventually, they realize, I can choose to make something beautiful here. And when they make that choice, that's how you know you're succeeding at creating the aesthetic game. So when we improvise in music or theater, we play together. We use an agreed-upon structure and a shared language to create something new with our friends. And at their best, tabletop role-playing games, they're no different. So the next time you sit down with your friends at the table, I encourage you to see beyond the dice bag, the character sheet, and the dungeon crawl, and instead, see that improv night, the writer's room, and the jam session. And don't forget to make it beautiful, because you can be an artist too. Thank you.
Cool. Next up, we have Ashlyn Sparrow, who's going to be presenting Coming of Age and Dethroning God. Please give her a warm welcome.
Thank you so much for your time. My name is Ashlyn Sparrow. I am the Assistant Director of the Weston Game Lab at the University of Chicago. And I spend a lot of time making games, but I also spend a lot of time thinking about games and analyzing games. And the games that I played when I was a child were Japanese role-playing games. I played them so often, and I've noticed a theme that a lot of the characters that you interact with are teenagers, and they are going on a quest and usually end up killing God. And I was curious about why that was. But before we start talking about that, I'd like to introduce you to my first and probably favorite Japanese role-playing game, Xenogears. This game was released in 1998 by Squaresoft. They are known as Square Enix right now. And it tells the story of a protagonist, Fei Fong Wong. He is 18, and he lives in a village, and he has retrograde amnesia. He's a martial artist. He's a painter. And he realizes that he has the ability to control this large mech here when his village comes under attack. And so he has to flee his village and leave and figure out, why does he know how to do this? How is this possible? And what are the other mysteries that are happening in the world? Like a true JRPG protagonist, he gains a series of friends who are helping him try and stop the Solaris Empire, and eventually learns that there is this artificial intelligence that's being controlled by this empire that has been created to guide humanity so that they can then so it can consume the biomass of the people on this planet so that it can continue to rise up and take over. Fun fact, this artificial intelligence is known as Deus, and essentially you could call him the god of this world. And so this is a common theme over and over again in Japanese role-playing games. You're defeating God. Let's take all of the JRPG protagonists that we can kind of think of. You also seem to have like spiky hair to be a JRPG protagonist, but I digress. You start off as a teenager, you gain a series of friends. Usually they all have different character classes. They help you fight your enemies, and in the end, you end up destroying God or a godlike being, right? Our favorite here, Sephiroth or Calamity Ganon, right? We also have like an actual god, Yaldabaoth, in Persona 5, which is a Gnostic god, a demiurge, that is a god, they translate it to a god of chaos in the game. So why is that, right? Why is there always this conversation about attacking and dethroning God? Like, what is going on here? So as a game designer and a game theorist and a person who teaches classes at the university, I thought I might try and take a cultural lens to this. And I grew up in a religious home. I grew up in a Baptist family, and this was a point of contention every time I played these games. So I guess the first thing that we have to talk about is God. And specifically from a Judeo-Christian Islamic perspective, what is God? Usually when we talk about God, there is one creator, one ultimate powerful being that has created the world, and you listen to them and you worship them. And you know, we can think of Moses, who had 10 commandments, came down, and I'm pretty sure the first commandment is, thou shalt put no other gods before me, thou shalt not have false gods. And so this means that you have a very jealous God. There can only be one God. That's how we think about religion in the West, primarily. But if we contrast that with a Japanese perspective, they have a very different viewpoint of religion. In fact, many people in Japan aren't Christians, they are Buddhist, but they also follow Shintoism, which can be viewed as a religion, but when people think about it, they view it more as a way of life. And it's a naturalistic religion or way of life, where there are actually a lot of spirits, kami, that inhabit the world around us. There is a kami for almost any and everything, a kami for the sun, the moon, the air around us, the earth that we stand on, fire. There are thousands of kami. So when we compare Shinto with the Christian view of God, there's actually a clash that happens. We can think that maybe having one person say that they are the true God is actually very hubristic, right? And a person who claims that they're the ones who've created the world, maybe they're not someone to be trusted. Maybe they're not someone to be listened to. And so I would say that Western religion is ripe for talking about that compared to a very community-based or a country like Japan, right? So that's my first reading of that. Maybe this is the reason why we're talking about dethroning God. But then what about these teenagers? Like, what's going on? Why are JRPG protagonists usually somewhere between 17 and like 22? God forbid you're 30. If you're 30, you're not the main character. Let's just be real. You are the mentor who might die, or you're just going on and helping along with the quest. But if we think about Japanese school systems, they are incredibly strict. You have tests that you must take. Your objective is to be at the highest, at the top of this list, because that is how you get into college. You have to study for all of your exams, and that is what you do. You have the most free time in school, but you also have no time at all. In Japan, there are high rates of depression for high school students and high rates of suicide. And so here we are in a place where we can think about, well, what does it mean to be young? What does it mean to be able to fight against fate, fight against a person who has created a society that you don't want to live in? This is a way that we can start thinking about Japanese role-playing games. And so there are a bunch of other ways that we can also think about doing close readings of games, not only just from an age perspective, a religious or cultural perspective, but there are so many different thought processes that we could have. And I would like to pose some questions for you all as you continue your journey of playing a lot of JRPGs. I would love if we could start talking about disability in JRPGs, as there are many of them. We have characters that have weapons for arms or don't have the ability to use their arms. They are blind or they are mute. And what does that mean? But what if we start looking at status effects in games and start talking about, well, what does it mean to be disabled in a game? And what does it mean when it's not a thing that you actually want? You don't want to be paralyzed. You don't want to sleep. You don't want to be poisoned. What does that say about the world? What does that say about the way that Japanese developers think about the world? What does it say to be a woman in the game industry or playing these games where there aren't many female protagonists leading the way? We could do close feminist readings about Japanese role-playing games and also talk about women's roles in society and contrast that from the West and also the East. There are just so many different things that you could actually talk about, and I'm hoping today that you start thinking about the games that you play and start questioning what's going on there. Why is it like this? And I hope that your knowledge has increased. Thank you.
Great, thank you so much, Ashlyn. Next up, we have Lane Anthony Flores presenting Epic Sourcing, Engaging Classics Responsibly. Please give him a hand.
My name is Lane Anthony Flores, and I am a professional game master with Tabletail Games, which means that I run professional games of mostly D&D 5e, but other systems as well online for people all over the country. And I'm also a classical philologist, which means that I study ancient Greek and Latin language and culture. And specifically, I'm interested in how ancient stories influence both the structure and the content of the kinds of stories that we still tell today. And so with that in mind, oh, there it is. So with that in mind, I want to talk a little bit about some stories that you may already be familiar with, right? First, the story of a man faced with an agonizing decision to either sacrifice the girl he's come to love as his own daughter for the betterment of society, or save the girl and perhaps see society around him crumble. Yes, if you already guessed it, I am talking about Iphigenia at Aulis, the 5th century play by Euripides. But if you didn't guess that one, no worries. I have another one for you. The story of a man who goes on a journey through what can only be really considered a multiverse, dragging along a younger member of his family with him, and through a series of mishaps and misadventures, continues to learn more about his own place within his family and that family's place in the larger cosmos. Yes, I am talking about Virgil's Aeneid from the 1st century AD, written around the time when the first emperor of Rome, Augustus, was ascending to his full power. So you see, these stories are still influencing the way that we think about storytelling today. And why wouldn't they? I mean, they're so full of interesting things. There's drama, there's romance, there's passion, there's battle, there's monsters and myth and mythical creatures and witches and giants. I mean, it's all right there. But a lot of these stories also come from the perspective of a very homogenous hero, right? And it's almost always a he, a probably Eurocentric white man. He's very, very hypermasculine, heteronormative, and able-bodied, the classical hero. But what if we start to think about storytelling, especially sourcing from these classical myths, legends, and stories from different othered perspectives? And that's the kind of thing I'm interested in. How can we source these myths from the perspectives of women and queer folks, from people of color that we also know existed in antiquity, or disabled folks, all of these people who existed and made the world richer in antiquity just like it did today? Well, I have a couple ideas I want to throw at you. First of all, and this is probably the most important thing you can do to diversify, no matter what kind of world you're building, diversify your reading, diversify your research. It's great to expose yourself to some of the preliminary, Edith Hamilton or older versions of the Iliad. These are great sources, but at the same time, there's so much out there for critical thinking to engage with. Feminist perspectives of all kinds of classical myth, two of my favorites being Ursula K. Le Guin and Nina McLaughlin. And when we're talking about diversifying not only your research, but also your world, let's talk a little bit about how we build characters that are also diverse, right? Specifically, non-player characters. Not every blind person has to be a seer, even if we've all heard that story before. Not every person of color has to be magical or have some sort of connection to the gods. Sometimes someone is just blind, and people of color are just being people. And the more that we diversify and normalize that for the normal NPCs around in our games, the more that we are inviting those people to be normal in that world, the more we're building a world that looks like it actually did in antiquity and like it actually does today. So think about that when you're building NPCs. The last idea I want to throw at you is talking about objectives in games, right? What is your objective? Who does it welcome in? And who benefits from your objective? So think about it like this. The Golden Fleece, a story maybe some of you have heard before. Jason, a hero of Greece, goes to the Black Sea, to the land of Colchis, which is a Near Eastern land, and his intention is to steal the Golden Fleece back. He's helped by an indigenous princess named Medea, and along with his hardy Argonaut sailors, he takes the fleece and goes back to Greece. Who does that benefit? Who's the primary person who's benefiting from that story? Well, really, it's kind of just Jason, right? It's certainly not the princess, and it's certainly not those indigenous peoples. But if we start to open up the idea of what the objective is, a larger objective maybe than just the Golden Fleece, we invite more people to be a part of that, more storytellers, and we widen the objective not only of the characters within the story, but the storytelling itself. The last thing I want to leave you with is this idea that these myths and legends are really just a culture's way of reasserting its values to itself. So we have different values now than maybe they did in classical antiquity, and maybe that's a good thing. Start to reassert your own values in your gaming and in your world building, and I promise you won't be disappointed. Thanks so much.
Great, thank you so much, Lane. Next up, we have Sean 4 presenting Breaking Down the Screen, diffusing the role of the game master. Please give a warm welcome.
Hello, my name is Sean 4, and I'm a professional game master, and apparently I want to make myself obsolete. I am an RPG evangelist. I want to share my hobby and the magic of collaborative storytelling with as many people as possible. And while RPGs are entering the mainstream right about now, there is still a very high barrier to entry. It's the barrier that I'm trying to break down with the service that I provide to people. And that barrier is very simple. It's the game master. It's right there in the name. There is, at every table, one player who is expected to have mastery over the game, and this creates a bottleneck. There are thousands of people out there who want to get into the hobby, but the need for someone to take all the responsibility of running a game means there aren't enough game masters or GMs to make space at the table for all of those potential players, even at a generous ratio like 5-to-1. But what if you didn't need a GM to start? The trend of GM-less games has been growing for over a decade, and I believe they could serve as a better gateway into the hobby. I'm not saying game masters will go away, I hope, but I do think the hobby needs to become less dependent on them in order to grow. And the ultimate result of this paradigm shift will actually be more game masters. The key to this is diffusing responsibility, taking all the things the game master is expected to do and distributing those efforts equally among the players. Here is a non-exhaustive list of all the responsibilities the game master is expected to undertake: adjudicating outcomes, creating the world, ensuring player safety, knowing the rules, mediating disputes, playing NPCs, preparing scenarios, schedule games, take notes. Not exhaustive. Like I said, there's probably more than this. But we can strip away the responsibilities that can easily be delegated or diffused. And these ones that I've stricken out, they're not unnecessary. Far from it. But they need not be the exclusive purview of the game master, which leaves us with the three most pertinent duties to facilitating role-playing games: creating a world, filling it with characters, and presenting gameable content. In a phrase, bringing the world to life. Traditionally, games consolidate this duty on one person to minimize the other player's experience of things which are external to their character. It's a familiar relationship. One player is the creator, the author, with authority over the world. But that makes all the rest of the players simply consumers. So how can we diffuse these core responsibilities such that players at the table share equally, not in the burden, but in the joy of collaborative storytelling? This is where the design of GM-less games and game systems can support us. And I want to look at three in particular: Fiasco, Fall of Magic, and Wanderhome. First, Fiasco is a 2009 role-playing game that casts its players as petty crooks with outsized ambitions. It's often said that at the end of a game of Fiasco, you'll have written a Coen Brothers movie, like Fargo or Blood Simple. To create the world, Fiasco uses playsets, modular supplements containing thematic options you can use in the setup portion of your game. You can play a Fiasco set in the Wild West, the suburbs, a gaming convention. Yours truly has even written a Fiasco playset that is set in the hit Netflix documentary Tiger King. Fiasco mostly eschews players playing NPCs by supporting player characters being at such loggerheads that outside opposition isn't even necessary. And using the setup rules, the players collectively prepare the scenario by creating this fraught and tangled web of relationships. So Fiasco diffuses responsibility quite effectively, but it lacks longevity, being primarily designed for one-shot systems. But in Fall of Magic, a 2015 role-playing game cum art object, players take on the role of companions, escorting the magus to save magic in a world where magic is dying. Creating the world in this game is a matter of simply taking what is presented on the screen-printed scroll and map that serves as the game board and filling in the generous white space that it provides. The prompts on the scroll imply or directly raise questions that players are empowered to answer. The power to play NPCs is even diffused among the players, including and especially the Magus, who is explicitly a shared character at the table. And in Fall of Magic, players do take turns, but players can play NPCs on any other player's turn. The scroll also provides the scenario with open-ended prompts and branching pathways, even including cards for sea, and secretly, there's an underside, an underworld to the map on the other side. This means that the solution kind of works for creating a different scenario every time, but the premise will always be the same. So finally, we have Wanderhome, a 2021 indie darling RPG about traveling animal folk in a heartwarming slice-of-life story a la Studio Ghibli. It runs on the diceless and GM-agnostic no dice, no master system. And I saved it for last not only because of how elegantly I believe it solves all these problems, but also its recency. It's a newcomer onto the RPG scene. It's suited for traditional long-term campaign-style play because it integrates creating settings, NPCs, and scenarios into the gameplay process. So as part of a game session, players actually generate character sheets for the location they'll be traveling to. It includes aesthetic elements, folklore, and a little bit about the people who live there. And the sheets even suggest in-game actions that the people and places can take. So players can actually pick up and play as the world itself, traditionally the game master's role, which they fluidly exchange this external role. And this also diffuses the power to create the scenario among the players. Instead of using dice for its randomness, it's the things that come out of your friends' brains. So ultimately, I believe this design philosophy can open a wider way into the tabletop role-playing game hobby. Wow, this slide really did some weird stuff to the word player. Didn't look like that before. Not only does this distributed responsibility for the game give everybody at the table an equal stake in the world, the narrative, and the characters, but it also serves as a better on-ramp to the hobby. In a way, GM-less games are actually GM-full games, giving everyone a chance to develop the skill of becoming a game master and facilitating this fun, collaborative, compelling gaming experience. Everyone in a GM-less game is becoming a better game master. And with more good game masters, come more good games. Thank you.
Cool. Can we get one more round of applause for all our presenters tonight? Nicely done. Cool. And a big shout out to the main stage team that pulled this all together. Go ahead and give us a follow on social media. We can clap for that. Yeah. At Main Stage Chicago. And we'll have future events we'd love to see you guys at. So thanks everyone for joining. Feel free to hang out, and we look forward to seeing you at the next one. Bye.